The Y Curve with Phil Dobby and Roger Hearing.
Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown.
And perhaps he should be uneasy as King Charles is crowned and anointed with all the medieval flummery with some modern inclusivity. The polls show the idea of a head of state by right of birth doesn't have as much support as it used to.
Britain's monarchy has weathered many storms in the last century. An abdication, messy divorces, the loss of empire, a tell-all memoir.
But can it survive a world in which comment is instant and universal, and we, the king's subjects, are so used to making our choices on everything ourselves, whether it's a prime minister, a new sofa, or who stays in on Strictly?
Can youth and modernisation and slimming down the cost and bling get us back on side? Or are they in danger of destroying the very mystique that makes it work at all, letting too much light in on the magic?
What needs to change at the palace, or will it all inevitably be swept away?
That's our subject today on The Y Curve.
Brought to you by Wigmore Associates.
The Y Curve.
Okay, we should point out that you wrote that introduction. You are a very cultured man.
Some
bit of Henry IV Part 2.
Yeah, no, I like to throw in the occasional allusion.
That education wasn't wasted, was it?
Yeah. No. But it's important to reflect that this is something that has a long cultural history as well as everything.
Well, it is. I mean, it is very much part of Britain, isn't it? And I'm in two minds about the royal family. On the one side, I do think it's important because it is part of our history. But on the other side, I really just couldn't care.
Well,
and I think so many people fall into that bracket.
And in the end, it's more than history. I mean, it's about who is our representative as head of state, technically. I mean, yes, chances are if we had a president, it wouldn't be a president a la the United States. It will be one like Ireland, where you just choose someone to represent us on formal occasions. But I have a horrible feeling if we did have that. This is my big issue.
If it became a political appointment.
It wouldn't. It would become something, the Sun or the Mail would run up, let's elect Jeremy Clarkson or Piers Morgan or something, and it would just be appalling. And there's a good Charles-type word.
So absolutely appalling. But at least we've got somebody who's there. We know who they are. Yeah. We've grown used to them, and they've got the facilities to accommodate. They've got quite a nice pad to show people around when they come.
If they're rubbish, in a way, we say, well, it's just
wait another 30 years.
Exactly. It's the genes. It's nothing. We haven't chosen it. We're not responsible.
Does he want it? Do you think? Do you think he wants it?
Oh yes.
You think that's why? And is he going to hang on to it?
Yeah.
So
I think so.
How old is he going to be? I mean, is he going to be in his 90s?
I mean, men tend not to look. Mind you, Philip went on a long time.
So William could be in his 60s before
well, this is a big part of the problem, which is that it's an old people's thing. I mean, if you look at the polls, and we'll get into that later, the polling suggests that the support for the monarchy is far, far greater in the older age groups.
Yeah,
I guess.
But has it always been the case? I wonder whether younger people go, oh no, I'm not for the monarchy, and then as they get older, they get a bit more used to it. And so
I think that's true in general. But I think there is a case for saying it's an absurdity that a nation that counts itself amongst the top 7 economies of the world, and has a democracy, a quite highly developed democracy, should nonetheless feel that it has to cling on to an institution which is by definition non-democratic.
Well, do you know what though? I mean, there's some things that do tie people together so much. So I'd say my brother keeps on saying how much of a Republican he is, but the moment there's any sense of occasion, he's right behind it. So and it does bring us together in a way almost. In a way nothing else does. So we've got the spectacle. In this age of the celebrity, they are seen as celebrities. And, the fact that we've got all this, the part of the family moving over to the United States and all that celebrity gossip that creates as well.
Apart. That's rather the point.
Maybe it's just hanging on in there. So that adds to the excitement. And so, otherwise, what would the magazines fill their papers with?
Well, they'd fill them with celebrities. And this is the point. We'd end up with a celebrity becoming president. That's how it would work. And it'd be equally undeserving people, but with the excuse, at least they've been elected. I mean, we voted them.
And is it the sense of belonging as well? Because it is something that makes us British. I don't know.
Well, not just British. I mean, Australia, Canada, New Zealand.
No, they don't care.
Well, they do at the moment. I mean, he is their head of state as well.
Yeah. But I think if they skipped a generation, perhaps things would be a lot safer. The future would be a lot safer.
Well, what do you think the Australians make of it?
Oh, look, I mean, Australia's been on the... I mean, Australia would have voted to become a republic way back in whenever it was in the 90s.
But they didn't.
They didn't because the model was wrong. And that was the vote about who should choose. And people did actually want a head of state that was voted for by the people. And it was, I think it was John Howard, wasn't it, who pushed the agenda that no, it should be someone chosen by the government. And people were thinking, well, we don't like the government very much. Why should we trust you to choose our head of state?
Yeah.
And so it was the model, really. Otherwise, it would have been
But would it be the case now? I mean, I think opinion polls suggest it wouldn't necessarily.
I think it would.
Really?
I'm sure it would. Yeah, absolutely would be. Particularly if it was the right model.
I mean, there is an absurdity.
So I wonder though whether Charles, with all of this money, and it is costing a great deal. What is he going to do with it? I mean, and there's a question about whether they should be able to hold their own portfolios or whether all the money should just be visible. But if they do have a portfolio and it doesn't have to be visible, and they want someone who's going to make the most out of it, you know where he should go?
Tell me. I'm sure you are going to tell me.
I think he should go and put all that money in the good folks at Wigmore Associates because they know how to protect money. They can help you plan. They can help with retirement, for example. Not that he needs to worry too much about that. He can make sure that you're passing on the right amount of money to the kids and the grandkids. Minimising tax, making sure you've got whatever your immediate needs are, whether it's health cover, paying for an extension to the house or the palace, depending on who we're talking about, or maybe you're getting ready to downsize. I suspect that doesn't apply in Charles's case, but Wigmore Associates can help you. You don't have to be a member of the royal family. Give them a call. They can help you sort out your finances, get you a plan for your life, look after your wealth and your life and your retirement. 0207 224 3400 is their phone number. Wigmore-associates.co.uk is their website address.
And if you talk to them, tell them
yes,
that we sent you.
Yes, those people on that podcast that was doing, it's terribly good, frightfully good.
But they make this podcast possible, and we're very grateful. So please tell them. Meanwhile,
the future of the royals.
Well,
so we should make the point, by the way, that we're recording this before, because I mean, the podcast really lasts a week or more. People listen weeks later.
It could all go horribly wrong.
We are talking before the coronation. So if we're saying there's not much interest, and then on the day there's just an overwhelming response, and everybody in the country is united.
I'm not going to predict either way on that one. Right. Or indeed, if somebody says, well, actually, no. I won't.
Yes, can anyone object?
Anyway,
someone who's just flown in at the last moment for the United States, perhaps.
Well, we're going to talk to someone who knows all about this and the why and the what and what may come in the future. It's Alice Hunt, who's Associate Professor at Southampton University, also a historian of the British monarchy, and he wrote a book about the last time we were a republic between 1649 and 1660 after the Civil War.
So actually, Alice, I think that book on the republic is not out yet, is it? Actually, it's about to be published. But tell us about that time. How did we cope when we weren't dependent on a royal family?
I think we coped pretty well, actually. It was a difficult time, obviously, for many, and the country didn't have very much money, and it was the effect of the years of the civil wars were awful. But this was a time that managed to kind of find a way slowly towards a different kind of government. It really struggled with being legitimate. The parliament that had put Charles I on trial and then beheaded him was not considered to be a full and legitimate parliament, and that was problematic. But the country found, by the time Charles II was restored, it was not certain at all that was going to happen. They were finding their way towards making a constitution and to working without a monarchy.
Although I'd say Oliver Cromwell wasn't actually king, but he wasn't far off, was he?
He wasn't far off, but he wasn't king, and there's a crucial difference there, I think. And the story is that he was a monarch, a king in all but name, but he refused to be king. And although there were aspects that were king-like, it was not a monarchy, and it was not. He did not approve of it being hereditary, and that's. That was important.
And that really is the central point, isn't it, of the whole debate that we're talking about. The nature of having someone in charge, well, technically in charge, who is there by right of their birth, and that's all.
So that is the continuity, isn't it, and the stability. So I think we all felt like when the Queen died, we'd all grown up with her, and so she was just part of our life. And the fact that she's not around anymore is what's raised this question mark, isn't it? Because that stability factor has disappeared now. So we're bound to ask the question, do we really need the royal family?
Yeah. I mean, and these big moments, and it wasn't particularly always appropriate, I don't think, around the funeral to really kind of have a look at the Constitution. You know, the Queen had died and there was a lot of affection for her, and there had been a very long reign, and this was a funeral. But now, with the coronation, I think we're invited. I think we have to ask these questions and look at the Constitution and think about, do we want a monarchy? What is a monarchy? Are we okay with what Cromwell called that hereditary way, whereby someone has a position which they owe to birth and to blood and to nothing else?
Well, you can either investigate it or take an opinion, or you can swear the promissory oath that we're supposed to be doing.
Well, yes, that's also
which I don't think that's going to go down quite well. I'm not really quite sure.
Well, I think I think it's a bit of a misstep.
I suppose one interesting thing, Alice, just as a historian, has it ever since 1660, since the Restoration, up until the present day, there's seriously been a contemplation of whether we will or should have a monarch? Has this been questioned at any other point in the last 300 years?
Since there was the Restoration, yes, it has come and gone, but it has never had the kind of hold that it had in the 1650s. And the thing is with the Republic in the 1650s that it wasn't intended to abolish monarchy. You know, the wars didn't set out to abolish monarchy. They suddenly found themselves in that position. So it didn't really have the time immediately to work out what a republic could be. But that tradition of republicanism did then begin in the 1650s. People began to write about it, began to kind of defend and imagine and defend kinds of republics that could work. And that persisted. And there were kind of other moments around kind of crises sort of later in the 17th century, with James II and the exclusion crisis, and other moments when people who might want another kind of government could put forward their views. But otherwise, I think our Republican past and republicanism in this country has been suppressed.
The question is, of course, how? I mean, if we were to go down that road, what form would it take? And that's where, I mean, Roger and I, just before we started talking to you, were talking about the situation in Australia, and that became unstuck because of the model. No one could agree on the model. So, if you move from the royal family and the monarchy, what do you move to?
Yeah, I mean, there are models to follow, but how do you agree on it? And this is what happened in the only time we were a republic in the 1650s. Very difficult to agree on what that should look like. And that's when kind of monarchy becomes a kind of fallback, because it has been there for so long. It seems to have this kind of legitimacy because of that. But yeah, to agree now on, I mean, that's what the argument is, isn't it? What would we move to, and how could you possibly have an elected head of state? Well, there are many countries that manage it and do it. I don't think it's enough to say, we wouldn't know what to do. We would just have to agree. We'd have to do it. We'd have to work it out.
Yeah, but then we look at how well Brexit worked out for us when we make a big move. And we're not necessarily that good at the implementation.
Yes. But that was the wrong move.
But essentially, you'd be talking about having a head of state elected by referendum, in a sense, probably. And the general sense was that didn't pay well when people were given a choice.
Yeah, I mean, constitutional monarchy it can work. I mean, it is fairly successful. It can be successful in other countries. I think the closest thing that we're going to get to is becoming constitutional monarchy that's much more on a kind of European style.
So how would that work?
With the Dutch royal family, I mean,
or the Swedes,
it costs a fraction of what it's costing us in the UK. But I wonder, do you think the main objection to the royal family from those people who do object to, do you think it is the cost of it? Because in the scheme of things, it is a large slug of money. But if you put it on, against the total amount of public spending, and then you start to look at how much is brought in international tourism, those numbers are not massive. I mean, they're big, but they're proportional, I guess.
Yes, I mean, I suppose if you work out actually how much is going out of your pocket, it might not be that much, but it's what it represents. I mean, they have enormous wealth. enormous wealth. A lot of it we don't really even kind of know about. A constitutional monarchy does not have to have the paraphernalia of the pomp and the palaces and the expense. We know that from looking at the other.
But isn't that what people are looking for? Isn't there a risk of letting light in on the magic, as Badgett said, where if it becomes less magical, it becomes less worthwhile?
Yeah, but the daylight has been let in on the magic for years, and as Hilary Mantel said, the faculty of awe remains intact. That we do know more about them. They don't have so much power. It has changed a lot, the monarchy, since. Over the years, and still they retain this kind of way of this kind of affection, this awe, this kind of magic. So I think they could reduce themselves quite significantly, and they would still be that magic.
Do you know what? You two are just going to start quoting classics, and I'm just going to feel so inadequate.
But Hilary Mantel, that's what she is a classic.
Oh, please. Shh. Now, so what about then? This idea of what it does in terms of our reputation overseas. Is that important? I mean, the Queen was always viewed very favourably, wasn't she? So whenever you had anybody, like the President of America, for example, visiting his mum in Scotland, always wanted to see the Queen. The former president. Yes, maybe not, but and it's obviously she had quite a nice pad where she could entertain people. That has been. You think of Britain overseas, and you do think of the royal family. It's part of brand Britain, isn't it? I mean, if you downscale that too much, then you are losing that sense of what most people identify Britain as being.
Yeah, I wonder whether Charles can do that in the same way. I mean, Elizabeth II had this amazing kind of capacity to draw affection from people all over the world, partly because she was so young when she came to the throne, but she also came to the throne in a completely different world, and was known more, and her role within in the Commonwealth, which kind of grew up around her and with her. I just don't think Charles III has the same international appeal. So, and brand Britain without the Queen, but with Charles III is slightly different. I don't think it's just a monarchy. I think it has to be about the personality too, and the person.
Well, that really is the point, isn't it? Because I was thinking back through the history of the monarchy, and you have these long-ruling, very well-regarded people, Victoria is the obvious example, and Queen Elizabeth II, who during their reigns have boosted the monarchy back up, and then you have sort of dodgy ones in between who sort of threaten its existence. So it's very much tied to personalities to get its power and its longevity.
Yes, and it always has been, I think. I mean, Elizabeth I was a similarly long reigning, who had an ability to instill affection, and she went on progresses and showed herself to the people, understood that she was sort of had value. There was value in kind of watching her and being seen. And the other monarchs who aren't so keen on doing that, who don't like putting themselves on show, who have wanted to withdraw more. I mean, Queen Victoria actually didn't particularly like being visible, but by the end of her life had kind of become incredibly kind of popular and loved. I think there's a personality, and I think there's a gender issue here as well, which we might want to think about. These long reigning monarchs who've been queens. And it's hard. It's hard for Charles to do that when he's coming to the throne age 74.
Exactly. And as you say, Queen Victoria had that age, coming in very young, had that in common with Queen Elizabeth. And so adds to that stability factor that we talked about. I mean, Charles is just going to be an old man. And we are going to be looking. I mean, if you look at the opinion polls, so there's a YouGov poll looking at popularity, the attitude towards various people. 62% of Brits have got a positive attitude to King Charles. 30% have got a negative view. But those with a very positive attitude is just 22%, compared to Prince William, 73%, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, 71%. So the next everyone wants the next generation. I mean, they may not want to, but if we skip to go, we might find the royal family suddenly becomes more popular because it is personality driven.
Yeah, and those polls have been there for a while. I remember a long time ago, even 10 years ago, there was a poll around should William become the next king and should it skip Charles, and the numbers then were surprisingly high. So some people have the charisma, some people have this kind of magnetism, which others don't. And what is that? Catherine does have it, and William does, but that's also the connection with Diana, I think. So for the young, I think it's because they're young, and I think for some generations, it's the connection between William and Diana and the affection that she had.
But you're right to talk about generations there, because it's interesting from that poll you're talking about. There's a big difference in age. If the under 25s, the under 35 seem far less keen. Now, maybe it's just that people, as they get older, get more conservative and therefore want to keep things. But is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I think there is. I think there is more to it. I think we really need to look at those polls. And I think particularly with the young, this is about seeing a royal family who don't represent who they think they are or the Britain that they live in. A royal family who, he looks far away because he's much older than them, but he's white, he's privileged. He doesn't seem to share their experiences. I just think they don't feel that a monarch does anything for them. I mean, when I talk to young people, they actually say, well, what does he do? So the argument about the brand Britain or the soft power, the work that they do to represent Britain abroad, they don't see, and they don't see what they do for the country. They think, well, people would still come and visit the Tower of London, and they still do the Tower of London, of course, because it's not owned by they don't live there anymore. But they'd go to Buckingham Palace. There'd still be a tourist industry around the royal family.
Well, if we had a revolution, maybe they could visit the Tower of London with the king in it.
Yeah,
that would draw in the crowds.
That would change things.
What kind of revolution do you have now? I mean, how would it work?
But as to what he does, so I mean, what he did do, of course, was he was quite prolific and outspoken on the environment.
Yeah.
Now he can't do that. He couldn't go to COP26 or 26 or 27, which or whatever, 27. He couldn't go there because the Parliament, supposedly, or the Prime Ministers, two of them wanted to stop him. So what he did stand for, he can't stand for anymore. So there is that question: what good is he?
But people know what he stands for. He's well established in that way, and there are things. It's not just the environment. I mean, last weekend I was down in Poundbury, which is known locally as Charlietown, where he promoted a particular view of architecture in a very key way. I mean, his monuments are there already, in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, he's. I think he's a serious man in many ways. In fact, he's thoughtful and has thought obviously deeply about this coronation and what's going to happen in it and what his role is and what his relationship is with the church and God. And he does have things to say about the environment, of course, and that is something that he could really do. But a constitutional monarch, there's so many contradictions at the moment. He's a constitutional monarch who now has to be quiet, and yet he has come to the throne with a whole past. We know a lot about him and we know what he thinks about a lot of things. So it kind of feels odd now that he would be silenced. And I wonder if there's some things that he could be more of an advocate for and could kind of represent us more. That could be relevant and valuable.
Yeah, that was my point.
He would step outside his position and then open himself up. The whole point about the Queen was we didn't know what she thought, at least officially.
But that was her rule.
Yes.
I mean, what's to say that we don't have a monarch who can express opinions, who is there adding to the public discourse? Maybe provided, he doesn't go too far. If he's there and drives an agenda which it's hard to debate climate change as something. I mean, obviously there are climate change deniers.
It's not political, is it?
Well, I mean, for some people it would be, but whatever you say, there's going to be some political extremes. But by and large, and of course he's going to come into conflict with Parliament, with the ruling government of the day from time to time. But is that a bad thing, perhaps, if it gets people talking?
Very difficult constitutionally, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is what's always been said, that it was the success of Elizabeth II's reign and the success of constitutional monarchy, when it kind of really properly bedded down, really only just over 100 years ago, that they were silent, that we didn't know what they thought or what they said, that they were absolutely unable to interfere with politics. The thing is that they, of course, they do. They have these private meetings, so things happen. And I think if I was to ever mention to any kind of constitutional historian, say, what about a head of state that did talk a bit more? It could be very effective. Everyone's like, no, that would be disastrous. That's not how it works. But with care, it's risky for sure. It is risky, but done with care, it could be very effective. There are some situations. I never really liked the Queen's speeches, for example. I used to find them kind of a bit anodyne. But when she spoke about COVID and during the lockdown, I actually thought, oh, this is quite interesting. A head of state actually sometimes can bring a country together and be quite moving and be humane.
Maybe because it was so rare in a way as well. It was very striking.
It was striking, but it was kind of effective.
But the one occasion where she did said to have had a political opinion publicly, I think, was when she asked the Scottish people to be very careful when they were talking, when they were going to the referendum. A lot of people read a lot into that. And I suppose that, in a way, brings us to another issue, which is king or queen of what? The United Kingdom is rapidly, or potentially, could become rather less united. So the role of king or queen becomes rather different, doesn't it?
And the Commonwealth as well, the whole question around the Commonwealth.
I think, perhaps. So Queen Victoria presided over a Britain that was expanding and the empire. Queen Elizabeth II then presided over the empire contracting and the beginning of the Commonwealth. And I think Charles III his reign is going to be marked by those Commonwealth realms pulling away, particularly in the Caribbean, but Australia is looking increasingly likely it's going to move that way. And then by the union here as well.
And even if those Commonwealth countries don't pull away, there's questionable human rights in some of those countries as well. Do we really want to be associated where, homosexuality, for example,
head of state in Uganda would be quite difficult at the moment, potentially. Not that she is, but if she were.
No. Head of the Commonwealth is different from head of state in the Commonwealth realms, or as they call them realms, but the independent Caribbean countries in which he is still head of state, and they don't want anything to do. A lot of them don't want anything to do with Charles III because of the connections with colonialism and
slavery,
empire. And
so Charles knows all of this, though, doesn't he? Because he's. I know. Here we are, just calling him Charles. I don't know what should I be addressing?
His Majesty.
His Majesty.
Yeah, come on.
Okay, all right, get with the game. Well, we still can. So His Majesty sort of knows all of this, and it seems bizarre saying it like that. But His Majesty knows all of this. Surely, he is. For example, he's trying to downscale. The size of the royal family and the size of the civil list and perhaps he will start asking for less money. Perhaps he'll also accept that there needs to be more visibility, and because
and transparency.
Exactly. For example, the Duchy of Cornwall, how much are they raking in from that, and why is that still a thing? Why don't we just hand all that land and all that earning potential back or sell it off? And then the palaces. How many of those and how many palaces do you need really to?
Well, do you get the impression, Alice, that he is thinking these things through, and in fact there will be change?
Well, I thought he was. I really did. I thought slimming down the monarchy for him meant not just slimming down who the royal family were in terms of who would see on the balcony, who the core royals were and the kind of the core family. I thought it would mean slimming down economically and divesting themselves of some wealth and property. But I'm just not sure now. I feel like this coronation I don't see anything that's slimmed down in this coronation particularly. It's going to be shorter. There aren't going to be 8,000 people in the Abbey, but it is going to be really spectacular. None of the kind of old rituals have particularly been changed. They've been sort of glossed and reinterpreted a bit. And I We'll wait to see. But I thought he might have made some bolder moves already, actually, by now, in terms of their assets. And I haven't seen that.
Well, it's the liabilities, I think, is one of the things. You talk about assets, but the Prince Andrew question, I suppose, has to come up. If you have people within the orbit who are, in inverted commas, bad actors or appear to be, that in itself changes perceptions, doesn't it?
Yeah. Although they've always managed to bounce back from badly behaved people in the royal family, and there have always been kind of rogue princes and scandals that the family has managed to. The monarchy. The family's managed to kind of manage, and then the royal family has kind of bounced back from. I mean, they're kind of terminators like that. They just kind of bounce back and keep coming, keep going.
As long as you get the right one on the throne.
He wouldn't be, though, if he was the firstborn and he was the king right now and he'd behaved like he was. I mean, that potentially could be the end of the royal family, couldn't it?
Well, I know. I mean, how do we? What happens when the rogue is the heir? I mean, it looks in pretty safe hands because William is absolutely in the cast of his grandmother, and dedicated, I think, to the idea of duty and service, which have become the kind of the buzzwords of modern monarchy. That it is all about duty and they are serving, and he is like that, but.
Well, you have to say that Charles's reputation, has gone up and down a bit, and the ritual they say is always the monarchs, like the prime ministers, go dull, mad, dull, mad. And if you look back,
where are we now?
Well, that's the interesting question. If Queen Elizabeth was dull, then heaven help us, which is quite the way some people are reading it.
But I mean, we're also in unusual times, aren't we? In that we've had this change of power at a time when the economy is quite depressed and people are really struggling, and then you've got this untold wealth at the same time. I wonder whether it's just a passing fad. And often when we've sort of like thought about the royal family and what use are they to us, there's a sense of occasion, there's the spectacle. So even now, we're recording this on the Wednesdays before the big day. And Twitter is full of people having taken photographs of the rehearsals that happened overnight, with hundreds of horses and thousands of people from the army and all the forces there, getting the train from Aldershot in the middle of the night.
A well-trained force, people called it.
And it's and people seem excited having seen it, as though this is going to be a big sense of occasion, and maybe. And in Britain, whenever we have those senses of occasions, it does somehow pull the country together. I wonder whether it will this time.
Yeah, I know. In the run-up, there's often this sort of scepticism, isn't there, that think, what is this all for? And is everyone going to get behind it? And then they happen. And even the most sort of people who really don't feel that they're interested somehow get moved by it. And what is that? It is this incredibly kind of well choreographed, immaculate, rehearsed spectacle that is completely kind of in step. There's this kind of, we see this unity of the state, all in line. I mean, it's so important that it has this kind of choreographed quality to it, that nothing is out of line, because it kind of looks unified. It looks like this is the state on show.
And on show to the world. And we may not be able to run an economy, but we can run an effective parade. That seems to be the
we can.
We're great organisers, so long as there's...
Yeah, and they can be emotional. I mean, even they appeal to the irrational. I mean,
that's an interesting. You mentioned irrational there, which I suppose naturally leads on to the fact that at the core of this, and it is ritual that's going on, but ritual, in fact, about religion, because it's a religious service, the coronation, and he is being installed as the head of the Church of England, and as various people pointed out, his history, divorced, adulterer, all that kind of thing, does make it a little awkward. And I wonder if that's part of the problem, in a way, where we are a less religious society. We don't really care necessarily what the Church of England thinks. So therefore, do we not care so much about this?
And when we are religious, we're not necessarily part of the Church of England.
Exactly.
So I mean, for example, the First Minister of Scotland has to swear allegiance to the King. I wonder how he felt about doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think at its core, the coronation, it's not just the pageantry. I mean, the beautiful procession will be spectacular, but this is a deeply religious ceremony, in which, yes, he swears to become head of the Church of England. He swears to uphold the Protestant faith, and he also swears to uphold the laws. But at its centre, he is anointed. And can you imagine anyone being anointed? I mean, bishops, priests, and biblical kings, and medieval kings, and early modern kings, and perhaps you could understand, but then the anointing there. But now, that's a really powerful and sacred and troubling act in the middle of this coronation.
Why troubling, do you think?
Because it turns him into something special. The language connects him with biblical kings. It connects him with the grace of God. It, as Welby has said in his commentary, sets him apart. And this.
But if you are very religious, you may believe that's a good thing, perhaps.
Yes, you may, and it could. Yes, of course. But how many of us, as you've just said, believe that? And the anointing has always been a bit troubling, even when it first was kind of really took hold. Medieval kings would ask their bishops, what becomes of me when I'm anointed? Doesn't it make me, a bit more special? Doesn't it make me a bit priestly? And the bishops would say, well, no, not exactly, but it does elevate you. It does raise your dignity, but not.
Well,
not
going back to your
quite
17th century analogy, of course, one of the issues about the killing of the king was you were killing the Lord's anointed, and exactly. They kind of believed that.
Yeah, and the belief that Charles I had, that when he was anointed and when he swore his oath at his coronation, that he could not be touched. He was not accountable to the people. He was accountable to God only. And this, for all its visibility and spectacle, this ceremony, the bit we won't see is the anointing. That's going to be in private. Now, there's nothing unusual about that. That has been the tradition. But I think in the 21st century, that is difficult. Everything else we can see, but we won't see that. And it's preserving that, the sacred heart of this ceremony, and it's preserving what underpins British monarchy, which is that it is bound up with God.
Alice, do you think the monarchy is going to survive? You're a historian, not a futurologist, I get that. But if you were to predict the next 50, 100 years, what do you think?
Well, history would say that, yes, it's going to survive in this country. It has survived against all odds. I think it will, actually.
But is it going to change? I guess is perhaps
I think it will change.
A more important question.
I think it will change more.
And obviously less money. Are we just going to downscale to a European type royal family? And what's wrong with that? Seems like a best of both worlds.
I think that is the most realistic and viable option. I don't think I think reinventing ourselves as a republic and not become a constitutional monarchy, I cannot see that happening. But I can see us reducing the pomp and the pageantry and the religious aspect. That could happen separately. He could be installed as invested as the Church of England. But I actually thought the ceremonies around his accession were really quite well done, and that could be the moment. And then there could be a smaller ceremony that would be a religious one for him, because that's a matter for those who adhere and belong to the Church of England, and for him as the head of the Church of England. But to fuse the two together, the state and the church, in this big coronation, that's something that does need to change. And I can see that might, but let's see what happens. They're putting out what they want to do on Saturday and how the message they want. But it will all be in how it's received and what the people
think. We haven't... You said what you think might happen. What do you think should happen? This is getting you to take off your academic hat and put on your citizen, or should I say subject?
No, I know. Will I take up the invitation to pledge my allegiance?
Can I take a guess on that one?
What do you think?
I suspect you won't.
No.
I don't think many of us will.
No,
will we?
I don't.
Okay, let's Alice. Will you or will you not?
What? Pledge my allegiance? No.
Yeah.
No. the historian's hat on. Well, I'm fascinated by the monarchy because I'm fascinated by power and its absence of power, and I'm fascinated by ceremonies that try to negotiate that power. But I do not think that monarchy is a grown-up kind of government. I don't like the appeal to the irrational and to the emotional and the hereditary way. So I would be behind a quite radical moves. I value what constitutional monarchy can be and can do. Actually, I could see that working, but if I was really pushed, I would like not to have a monarchy.
Right. So, but if we are stuck with it, I guess a very much downscaled version where it's really just a figurehead type role, handy for state visits, someone for visiting presidents to go and see. They've got quite nice reception facilities. But if you, let's
and a constitutional check as well. There is a constitutional kind of check there. And we don't have to go through an election every now and then, around whether it's, who should be the president.
Well, thank God for that. God does come into this.
That would be hard.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think with all that history and all the interest, we could still preserve. We could still be proud of certain certain aspects of our past and the rituals and the regalia. That could still be part of us, but it wouldn't have to represent all of us.
Well, do you know if we did vote, it'd be David Attenborough, so we'd still get an old
David
man
Attenborough.
in charge, wouldn't
Well, we asked this group of primary school children the other day who they'd want. And of course, it was a whole load of footballers, and even footballers, not British footballers, actually. Ronaldo was there. But David Attenborough came up. These are young, so it's not just the age. They identified with David Attenborough and they thought, well, he's someone who cares about the planet. So
well, I think if His Majesty and I'm talking about David Attenborough there and Charles, if they both died on the same day, I suspect there might be more sorrow for David Attenborough. Just very quickly before we go though, if we did downscale it, how far do you go before you go too far, where you start to lose the magic, as we were talking about before? Monarch. So you could look at, say, for example, we've got this magnificent building in Buckingham Palace and all the other royal palaces. What do we do with those if we downscale them? But then here's another question as well, because if that's an important part of our culture that we want to maintain, and there's obviously the cost of maintaining that, you don't want to turn it into a hotel for visiting or a casino. But similarly, aside from the royal family, but it is related to religion, we've got this issue that English village life is built around churches, and we're struggling to maintain churches, and there's the cost associated with that as well, which is a religious significance, but it's also, aside from religion, it's just part of the British culture, the fabric of British society. So it's part and parcel of the same issue, I guess.
Okay. So your first point is, what happens if you do away with the magic? Well, I suppose I would kind of ask, well, what do we need the magic for? Is it something we absolutely need in our lives to have these moments where we're kind of awestruck or where we feel in the presence of something greater? Can that not be achieved in other ways?
We've got the Eurovision Song Contest next week.
Well, that's hot on the heels of the coronation. Yeah. Many other people find magic in many other ways. For some people, it is this kind of charisma around monarchy, but not for all. Religion, for some, of course, still has that, absolutely, and should have a place in this country. But I don't know if we need the magic of monarchy. Is a hangover from the past, and is one that maybe we could let ourselves. I mean, it's a yoke, as John Milton said, the yoke of servile pomp.
Right. So then the other question then is how much of the money that we're spending on the royals actually
could we actually spend on other things?
But is also being used to maintain an infrastructure, buildings which are an important part of our history.
Yeah, they are an important part of our history, but we would still maintain them. They would still be be looked after. I mean, they would still be very well visited. Versailles, one of the most visited sites in the world. There's no king there anymore, but there was a magical king there, and that magic is still there when you visit it. It's like, God, they really believed this stuff. The kings who lived there really believed they were touched by God. Why can't we have that?
Yeah. Well, you see, the great thing is here we still do.
Well, some of us do. Anyway, I think we can end by saying, God save the Constitution, if not God save the King, I suppose. And we've been speaking to a historian who says history doesn't have to actually constrict us. It can be remembered without necessarily being part of the deal.
You've been very entertaining, Alice.
Alice, thank you so much for being with us. Really fascinating. And, I hope you enjoy Saturday in whatever form you do.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to be there on the Mall, so yeah, it'll be fun.
I was a little bit hypocritical, if you don't mind me saying.
I'm working.
Yes.
I'm doing stuff with the World Service, so it'll be interesting.
Very good.
But
very good. All
I
right.
enjoyed
Well, thank
the
you
chat.
for talking to us.
You.
Thanks, Alice.
Bye.
So there we are. Yes, the King, and he is going to be crowned. And
but never mind that. Who? I mean, I mentioned it. Who's going to win Eurovision?
You think it's a more important event? I suppose it'd be interesting to see whether more
TV ratings are going to be interesting. Aren't they?
They will be comparable because Eurovision is coming up, and it is it's hugely political, as we know from the fact Ukraine won it last time. Maybe on musical quality, but I think based on a lot of sympathy as well.
Yeah.
And it's being staged, of course, in Liverpool because they can't stage it in Ukraine. But what does all the Eurovision history, what does the Eurovision culture, what does the music tell us about?
Is music actually part of it? I mean,
it's a bit part of it, but it's not all of it.
But the songs are, by and large, they're
some
pretty
are good.
dire.
Oh, come on, ABBA, back in the day.
There we are, you've just reinforced my point.
Oh, dear. Right. but it has a lot of significance. Why do certain people vote for certain countries? Why is the music as it is? And what does it tell us about?
And if it is political, can we tell already who's going to win next Saturday?
Indeed. It's going to be fascinating. We're going to talk about that. We're going to find out what we can judge culturally and politically from the Eurovision Song Contest.
And if you're going to have a wager, listen next week, because if we can get to the bottom of the politics,
we will try and find out who's going to win.
We want to cut on how much
That's all coming up next week
on the Y Curve, brought to you by Wigmore Associates. See you then.
The Y Curve.